Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, October 14th around here, and we have a jam-packed show. There's no two ways about that. We'll get into the Ohio State-Oregon game to start, then we'll get into the two overtime games, the other two big performances from this past weekend. LSU gets a huge win over Ole Miss at home, as well as Penn State going all the way out west and getting a huge win over USC. Then we'll get to all the teams that escaped with a win, including Alabama and Tennessee. Avoiding their second straight loss would have been disaster in both those places if they went the other direction. And then Kansas State barely getting out of Boulder with a win. Definitely a really, really fun game, and that tends to be a theme around Colorado's games this year. Then we'll do kind of the rest of the top 25, get to Texas kind of just dominating the Red River, Georgia continuing to struggle, BYU with a huge win. We'll get to all of those right there, and then we'll just do a whip around. We'll get to all of the games we didn't get a chance to get to earlier in the show. So Utah falling is going to be a huge one. Iowa putting up 40 points somehow. A ton of stuff to get to in the back half, including Vandy continuing the run that they're on. So we'll get to all of that when we start, but before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link, to use the super chat at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. You can click on that $sign, add any question, comment you like. It will pop up on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be very interactive, so utilize that as you see fit. The gsmcpodcast.net page is also up for the tip and donations if you'd like to use that. Does the exact same thing. So definitely utilize that because a lot of questions to be had after this crazy weekend. We'll start over there in Eugene, Oregon, because that was the big game going into the weekend, and it really lived up to the hype. It was absolutely incredible out there in Eugene. It was so much fun to watch this team go to work. I'm sorry, I'm a little all over the place right now. There we go. Here we are. So Oregon gets a win 32-31 in this one, and this one lived up to the hype. We are through two of the games that I think everyone circled around March or April, whenever these schedules came out. You had Georgia, Alabama, you had Ohio State, Oregon. Both of those have been absolutely incredible. You could argue the two best games of the year. I think it's very easy to argue a couple of the other games we'll talk about today were elite games as well. But at the end of the day, really lived up to the hype. Oregon gets a very, very close win, and it was awesome. I think the biggest thing here that you have to take away is they got Dillon Gabriel for a reason, and it was this game, and he executed at a ridiculously high level. I said it when I was previewing this show. I was very nervous about his ability to make the plays he needed to down the stretch. And I believe, I can't remember the name of the chatter, but there was an Oregon fan in here saying, I expected both those quarterbacks to throw an interception. I very much did as well, and neither of them did. So a lot going into this game, but Dillon Gabriel got the best of Will Howard. He played really, really good football, was absolutely incredible all over the field. He was 8 for 10 for passes, 8 for 10, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks on passes over 10 yards. The kid was incredible. Top to bottom, he was absolutely awesome this game. Made a play with his legs, obviously, for that touchdown run, which I think is that right there. But the reality is, that's exactly why you went out and got Dillon Gabriel, and he showed you on Saturday night why he is so special. And then he took advantage of Denzel Burke a lot. A lot of his greatness came at the expense of Denzel Burke. He was targeted 8 times in this game, 8 catches, 179 yards, 2 touchdowns. He is a very good player. I feel very confident in that. He is a guy that I think is going to be able to bounce back from this and play really good football. He just got burned a couple of times, and he very much needs to bounce back because this defense, this back end in particular, I think predicates a lot on being able to say Denzel is going to be able to handle what he can handle on his side of the field, and then we can deploy the rest of the guys to handle all the other stuff, which Lathan Ransom playing all around the field, kind of a rover position. You have Caleb Downs coming down to the box being incredible in run help. You have so many different guys on that defense. It does kind of predicate on and start with Denzel Burke. He does need to be that corner that they can rely on pretty much start to finish, and on Saturday it just wasn't that way. Still a very talented player, still expect great things from him, but as of right now, definitely left a little bit on the table in this game. we got to talk about Dan Lanning. And I understand I should have had a picture of him here, but the reality is we got to talk about just this Oregon program overall. Because if you've been paying attention before this year, you saw the signs, right? Recruiting at a ridiculously elite level, building where he needs to build, which is in the trenches, which we'll get to here in a second, paid real dividends in this game. But the reality is he was absolutely remarkable. He's been building this program up for so many years. Last year, he got really close to breaking through, lost to Washington twice. This was his moment, and he took full advantage, and you saw it after the game. The emotion after this one was absolutely special, and it shows you just how much this one meant and just how much he knew this one was about going forward in the Big Ten. Remarkable moment for him, and definitely puts him on a really, really good track going forward this season and beyond, really, at Oregon. And then we got Ryan Day. The question around him was always, can you win the big game? He didn't win the big game. And that's kind of the end-all be-all in a lot of senses. When you're talking to Ohio State fans, they want that big win. I believe he's something like 2-8 against top 5 opponents. Needs to be better. No two ways about that. That being said, I don't necessarily think that was I don't know if there were a lot of the issues that Ohio State had in this game were Ryan Day dependent. I think there were some issues that could have been handled a little bit better. I thought the last drive in terms of clock management could have been handled a little bit better, but that more fell on Chip Kelly's side of things than Ryan Day's, just because the play calling was a little bit all over the place, and I'll get to that here in a second. But the reality is, I do think it's one of those things that it's very easy to sit here and say Ryan Day can't get it done on the national stage again. He has to be able to turn the corner. I don't know. It's one of those games. It wasn't like Michigan last year. Now, they did get dominated on the line of scrimmage, but it wasn't quite like Michigan in the sense that they just got rolled over. They played a really solid game. They fought punch for punch for most of this game and then just came up a little bit short. So it's hard for me to sit here and say, Ryan Day shouldn't be the head coach or, anything crazy should happen. But obviously, when you're an Ohio State fan, you want this big game, and you came out on the wrong side. And that's kind of the end-all be-all here. He has to start getting on the right side of these things. But getting back to we talked about Dillon Gabriel. He proved them right. I don't want to say Will Howard proved Ohio State fans wrong about bringing him in, about being confident in who he is, because I fully understand the last decision cannot happen. Period. End of story. He has to be able to get down in time, give them a shot. Now, if he got down in time, he probably is sitting around the 33-yard line, 50-yard kick. Don't know if he makes it. I would probably wager to say he misses it, but at the end of the day, college kickers are absolutely incredible, so who knows. Regardless, he has to give his team a shot. There's no two ways about that. He has to be more aware of his surroundings. All of that being said, this last drive was handled very poorly from a play calling perspective, at least from my perspective. They had 2 plays of the 8 plays on that drive got out of bounds, and only one of them, to my estimation, was really designed to get out of bounds. And Emeka Egbuka made a great play to get the other one out of bounds, but the reality is they threw way too many short of the sticks. They threw way too many inbounds, and Oregon took advantage. And then you put Will Howard in the position where you got 6 seconds left, and you don't really know what to do, and then you're just a second late getting down. So I think overall that last drive was not handled very well, but obviously the story is going to be Will Howard. Now, no turnovers, 300 passing yards. If I told you that on Friday, if you're an Ohio State fan, I told you were getting that from Will Howard, you would feel great about it. I understand he made the final mistake, but the reality is he gets down on time, make or miss that field goal. If he gets down on time with 1 second left and they're able to set up and kick that field goal, the narrative around him is totally different. So I'm not here to tear down Will Howard. He did make a big mistake, and he's going to have to learn from that, but the reality is played a really, really solid game in a really tough atmosphere. But also, little PS, I don't know if Dan Lanning ran the 12th player on the field on purpose. If he did, that's absolutely genius, but regardless, the clock should reset in that rule. I don't understand that rule by any means. I think it's not the offense's fault that the defense has 12 men, so I thought that should have reset. I don't understand why the rule is different, but at the end of the day, if he did it on purpose, wow. If he didn't do it on purpose, still worked out. No two ways about that. He absolutely did, Andre. He was absolutely incredible. I was just talking about the comment that you had where we said felt like both quarterbacks were going to throw a pick. We were wrong on both accounts, but it was absolutely incredible to watch that. Offensive explosivity was a huge part of this. It was something that, frankly, was missing from Oregon for the first couple of weeks. You worried about the you worried about Dillon Gabriel being able to push the ball downfield, and that was not remotely a problem. 341 through the air, 69, 48, 32 twice in passing in pass plays. Also had runs of 25 and 27 yards, which was that Dillon Gabriel touchdown. So Will Stein went to work. He absolutely ate Jim Knowles' dinner. He did everything that this offense wanted to do the first couple of weeks. Maybe it was just they were holding a little bit back for this one, and they really came out swinging. The offensive line and defensive line for Oregon controlled this game in a lot of ways, and I don't think they just dominated in so many different ways. The Ohio State offensive line that, frankly, I still believe is one of the best in the entire country. I still believe has elite edge rushers. 1 sack, 8 pressures. And it's because Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly are one of, if not the best tackle duo in the entire country. The only other one that I can think of is Will Campbell, Emory Jones, and that's a very tough battle. Two elite duos out there. But the reality is, you get 1 sack and 8 pressures with this defensive line, you're probably going to win the game. And then on the other side, if you're able to stop Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, 21 carries, 110 yards, 1 touchdown, that's even better. You're doing exactly what you need to do to beat Ohio State because, frankly, their stats are going to look good as long as they're not looking great. You're probably playing pretty good football around them. And then you made enough defensive plays. It wasn't all that pretty. Ohio State did plenty offensively, but when they needed them, they absolutely got the stops. Ohio State had a chance to go up 14 early in this game, and Oregon forced a fumble. Then they had really solid coverage down the stretch of that game just to give them a little bit of comfort. And I think there were a lot of things that went into that. I think I don't know why Ohio State didn't run the ball a little bit more in the second half. Oregon did a great job stopping it, but they were running the ball pretty effectively in the first half and then kind of changed offensive game plan. So something to think about when we go forward with Ohio State. But where do they go from here is a big-time question we have to ask for both these teams in two very, very different contexts, obviously. But we'll start with Ohio State. This one hurts. There's no two ways about that. I don't know if it's one of those things that you look up and you try to, fire Ryan Day or you regret getting Will Howard or any of that type of stuff, because I do think you played one of the best teams in the country, maybe the best team in the country, depending on who you ask, and you played them at their house. You played them within 1 point. Obviously, the end of the game was an absolute nightmare. It's one of those things that is going to be really, really hard to shake. But you take the full picture. You take the entirety of the game. I think you can feel okay if you're Ohio State. Now, the defense has to get a ton better. This back end was supposed to be the best back end in the entire country. That's very much what I thought going into the season. And I'm not necessarily fully off that take, but man, Oregon made them look very, very benign. There's no two ways about that. So they definitely have some things to figure out. The defensive pass rush has to get there more often. They probably won't face an offensive line like Oregon until they possibly face Oregon again. But the reality is they got a lot of stuff to figure out. I still think this is a very good team. I still think they're towards the top 4 or 5 teams in the country, and they will have plenty to say going forward. But definitely some things to figure out, and you got to go to Penn State in a couple of weeks. And if you don't have them figured out by then, maybe you got 2 losses and you're looking on the outside of the Big Ten title, which you essentially guaranteed going into the season. And then for Oregon, this was the moment. No two ways about that. Oregon has kind of been in a weird place for the past couple of years. Dan Lanning's been building. He's been doing such a good job behind the scenes. You haven't quite gotten to the point where you see it on the field, at least to the extent that they want it to. Being a national title contender, being the people that are very much in the conversation for everything in college football. This was that moment where they proved to everyone that they are. It was absolutely incredible to watch this team. Dan Lanning did an incredible job. Obviously was a little bit aggressive with that onside kick that I don't know how it worked, but you'll take what you can get in this world. But the reality is this team is off to the races. Big Ten title, CFP, national title, all on the table for this team. Obviously, some things they'll have to deal with. They have to go to Purdue on Friday night, and I know it's Purdue. West Lafayette on Friday night is an absolute nightmare, so just something to keep in mind there. But the reality is, I think this is an elite team. Dylan Gabriel has shot himself up to the Heisman odds. I think Evan Stewart having a big game is absolutely huge for this team because as much as I love Tez Johnson, you need a little bit more guys. And Evan Stewart had been a little bit slow start to the season, but really came on in this game, was absolutely incredible. More than anything, a remarkable team. They controlled this game for a lot of it. I think Ohio State, hung around for a lot of it, but it really did feel like most of this game was dictated by Oregon, and it came out that way. Definitely the biggest win of the entire college football season, and Oregon right up there near the top. Depending on who you ask, they're the number 1 team in the country. Texas is the number 1 team in the country. Frankly, to me, it doesn't matter. Both those teams are absolutely awesome, but Oregon does have the biggest win of the bunch. No two ways about that. An absolutely massive win, and who knows what happens now. Maybe Oregon goes on a little bit of a tear here. Maybe Oregon turns into a terrifying entity going forward. But as of right now, they get to enjoy this one, move forward, hopefully beat Purdue on Friday, and then you're off to the races and continue rolling. But incredible game, one of those that I have to imagine, we might not see these two teams again. I have to imagine we'll see both these teams in postseason football. I feel like they're both CFP teams. If something happens with Ohio State down the road, we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, elite teams playing elite football in an elite atmosphere. It was college football. It was absolutely incredible to watch. But let's take our first break here. Got a little carried away there. Love that game. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we got to get to all the the big overtime games. We have to get to LSU Ole Miss. We got to get to Penn State USC. Two huge games that definitely have a lot to do with the CFP race going forward. So we'll break it down right after this.